All right, I'll introduce myself. So, um, the this is a an update and a sort of a reprise of a presentation that I gave to, for the New York City Pollinator Working Group, of which I'm a member here in New York City, back in May. We had a speaker series this year for pollinator research in New York City, and as you'll see, I happen to be doing some pollinator research in New York City this year, so I thought it would be interesting to talk about. Um, just a little bit about me. Uh, they, them pronouns, he, him is also acceptable. Just the main thing about my background is sort of like the big forces that got me to where I am. I've had a lifelong love of nature and interest in nature. That's where I spent as much time as possible, even as a young child. You know, all the other kids on the playground, and I'm off on the side looking at a giant bright orange maple leaf. You know, that's kind of what the child I've always been, and I remain childlike. Um, Photography is really a really important piece of what I do. And I had my first camera in my hand at age 5, thanks to my father. Um, and I've been living in New York City since 1979 and started my first garden in 1981. And the garden I have now is the fourth garden, and that's what I'll be talking about. So pop quiz. Uh, New York City, not New York State, New York City is home to how many different bee species? And you could put your idea in the chat. Just want to see where, sort of get the baseline of people here. How many bee species do you think there are in New York City? You can use the letter or just give me a number. Good, 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 good. Yeah. So lots of different ideas, lots of different perceptions of New York City as bee habitat. Okay. Okay. I would say this is a pretty knowledgeable group. Most of the time when I ask people about this, especially if I'm doing like uh, sidewalk SciComm, as I call it, you know, just talking to people on the walking by on the sidewalk, most of them are just, they can think of, you know, honeybees is the first they think of. Bumblebees, they probably know if I remind them there's bumblebees. And they're like, oh, okay. There are 217 species of bees that can be found in New York City currently. There are many that have been extirpated from New York City, but New York State has 450. So it's pretty impressive that almost half of the bee species in New York City in New York State can be found in New York City. And this reflects a global trend of cities as kind of refugia for bees in particular in cities. And there's a number of reasons for that. We won't get into those today. And where am I going? Okay. So I'm going to talk about the current garden because that's really the basis for how I got involved in this project that I'll be talking about in a little bit. Um, we bought our home 20 years ago, the 20th year. I won't show you anything about the house, but you'll see it in the background. This is what I had to work with in the front yard. I was not intimidated by this. After all, this was my fourth garden in New York City. I'd already been gardening for 20 years or so. And so this was just a blank slate for me to play around with. The backyard was even worse. Um, this is from May of this year. So this is just an idea of the transformation that I've done with the garden. And you can just kind of barely see these little signs back here. I'll do this, give you a better, bigger view. This is uh, the same thing from May. You can see there's some habitat signs here, and there's this sign in the middle. This is new this year. This is from the Ground Nesting Bees project, and we'll be showing you what that looks like and some other things. But there's lots and lots of opportunities for habitat. Bees nest in every opportunity that you can see here. There's Algochlora pura, pure golden uh, green sweat bee nests in the rotting logs. Um, Ceratina zodontomerus, a small carpenter bees, they nest in the dead plant stems, and so on. There's just everything here is habitat. It's designed and managed for habitat. And I took this afternoon just because I wanted you to see how it changes through the year, and this is what it's looking like right now. It's a terrible photo, but just you can see it's the summer, out of control goldenrods and asters and stuff. And this, believe it or not, this is a evening primrose, this giant thing over here. Um, from the beginning, I've used native plants at all my gardens in the city, but of course, my understanding of what that means has changed dramatically over the years. This is just showing the acquisition of plants in my garden. This far left bar is kind of plants I brought from my prior gardens. So I did have some folks coming with me, some favorites. Some of them are still with me. Not all of them, unfortunately. Um, but you also like pay attention to uh, the ecotype, but the ecological appropriateness of the plants of the species that I'm acquiring. I have a long wish list, and all of them are mostly thoughtfully considered to increase the diversity in my garden. It's not just the number of species, but how many different plant families I have now as I learned more about insect-plant associations and specialization. And we'll see an example of that later on. So just I love spreadsheets, and that was a good example of one. These are some of the visitors to flowers in my garden. These are just the top 15. As you can see, I have documented 489 species of insects visiting my garden, visiting flowers in my garden. So that diversity of flora is really important for helping to attract and sustain a diversity of insects. Some of these I may, not on this list, but way down the list, I may have only seen them once in 20 years, but I count them anyway. So that plant diversity brings us to floral diversity, brings us to insect diversity, and it's all connected. So I keep saying, that's just one of my favorite little, little gifs. Hopefully that worked for all of you. Yeah, so let's get on with it. Let's talk about the bees. Um, my little bees are a species of bee called Coletes thoracicus, the Rufous-backed Cellophane Bee. They are one of many species of ground nesting bees, and we'll be talking about what that means in a moment. I want to show you, this is also from the first year of the garden before I did anything. You can see there's just some conventional garden plants there now. Now it's completely overrun with sunflowers, goldenrods, milkweed. They're just flopping into the driveway. I just yanked out a bunch of them today because I have to get the car out to go on a field trip tomorrow. So um, what's important of interest here is this is the spot. This is the spot where I first noticed my little bees, and we'll take a deeper dive into that. This is what I noticed. Now, a couple of weeks before this, I had been gardening in this corner, kind of that end of the side of the house along the driveway, and I had noticed some bees flying around. I had also noticed, actually, I had noticed these anthills, giant anthills in that corner of the garden. I was very curious about it. This pavement here, this is actually the driveway. It narrows. At the time, it narrowed. I've since taken up a lot of this driveway to make room for the garden. And this is what I was looking at. But then one day I was out there again and I noticed lots of bees. And I thought I had heard of mining bees, which is the family Andrenidae in of bees. And I thought, oh, maybe that's what they are, because I know those are bees that mine. They nest in the ground, and that's probably what I have. And so I tried to get some pictures of them and so on. If you look really closely at this, there's a little bee sitting at the entrance to her nest, just keeping an eye on me. So they were very active at the time of this, and this was in May of 2008. So I have been watching and monitoring the bees, and they've been watching me for 18 years. That's one of the things that attracted my population to the ground nesting bees project. This is what it actually is: Cladis thoracicus, rufous-backed cellophane bee. And isn't that a gorgeous, gorgeous bee? They're so beautiful. I think they should make plushies of these. They're so sweet. Um, and and look at that punam. Look at that little face. Um, this triangular face is characteristic of this family of bees, the Coletidae. So if you happen to get a bee face on, um, and you see this kind of a shape, that's a good indication. I took these pictures, by the way, capturing bees from that day that I saw that. I wanted to find out what they were. I captured them, chilled them in the refrigerator, set up my camera set up on the table in my backyard, which had an umbrella over it, and then brought it out, put it on this card, and then I had about a minute of working time. It was really warm. Before it warmed up, it just flew off and got back on it. So I submitted it to Bug Guide. Uh, at the time, that was the only game in town for insect identification, and there it was confirmed as a cellophane bee, not a mining bee. And this is a screenshot of my actual Bug Guide observation with those photos in it. There's the lengthwise and there's the headshot. When you look at these nest entrances in detail, they're really impressive. They're very precise. They're very precisely dug out. It's not like you'll see these mounds of dirt thrown out, but you'll also see just how precise this hole is. Um, Maybe not that hole, but another hole I happened to be digging up, and just the surface of the soil happened to come up as a clump, and the hole remained intact. And I just as a size comparison, I said, oh, it is exactly the diameter of a regular #2 pencil. So it gives you an idea of the size of these bees and what they're doing. Um, this is looking up through that little piece of nest entrance. So this is what a bee kind of would see. Obviously, that's not what they would see, but it just was nice to be able to look at it from their perspective. So when I say participatory pollinator research, I'm using that phrase because that's what the ground nesting bees project, that's the phrasing that they use, and they're very deliberate about that. They wrote a paper about it. And you may also think of it as community science, citizen science. It's very similar, but this is a lot more active participation, as you'll see. Now, so some examples of citizen science, community science, participatory science. Bug Guide was established in 2003. It's still going. There was a project called Bee Watchers that opened up in 2007 that I was aware of but did not participate in. I don't know when it ended. There was the Great Pollinator Project, which was started in New York City, and then got expanded. That was where people were actually observing bees on sunflowers in particular. iNaturalist became available. It is no longer just a student project in 2012. That is still very active. I should have bolded that because I am very active in iNaturalist. But the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey and the Ground Nesting Bees projects, I'm going to be talking about those two as kind of the participatory science aspect that I've been involved in heavily with both of these projects. So it kind of goes back almost 10 years to um, in 2016, there was the New York State Pollinator Protection Plan was finalized. That had actually been authorized by legislation, which was like another 2 to 3 years prior to that, and published in 2017. So um, this particular statement out of that plan is really important. The majority of research is primarily centered on honeybee health. Why? Because that's where the money is. Big agriculture, industrial agriculture cannot exist without moving pollinators around because they've decimated the landscape. There are no pollinators left in large scale agriculture because they've eliminated all possible habitat. So of course they have to ship them in by the truckload. So that's why there's more research on honeybees is because of large scale agriculture and big ag. Um, they go on to say some of the things that we really don't know that we need to know. This emphasis on honeybees is so irritating to me that I actually adapted a meme for this several years ago. And you're welcome to use this. I can provide it to you if you want. Um, yeah, if you're not familiar with this particular meme, I can't explain it to you in a short amount of time right now. But anyway, it's from Star Wars, so I'll leave it at that. These are Star Wars people. Um, so that's my response to Big B. Another part of the plan was, well, what do we do about it? Like, here's the problem. So what do we do? And so one of the things was they tasked all the different agencies of the state with what are you going to do? What are you going to do about pollinators? And each department came up with some different thing. And the Department of Environmental Conservation said, we're going to do an evaluation of native pollinators. DOT, for example, would do things like look at mowing regimes or planting native swards and things like that. So each department has something different. This multi-year evaluation turned into the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey, and I participated in this. I will actually see if I can copy this stuff, and I have notes here, and I will paste it into the chat because that way when we save the chat, it'll all be there. Ooh, there's a lot of comments. Okay. Thank you for the props on the meme. Um, so the New York State Natural Heritage Program took on the coordinating task, and the project is this pollinators. You can get the actual report. The list of contributors or participants, so participatory science, they called them participants already. In the final report, and they're in the back along with hundreds of other people. There are two iNaturalist projects that are also linked there. I'm the lead contributor in both of those, very active. The timing of this worked out that the pandemic hit, and I had a lot of time to look at stuff in my garden, and I found a lot of stuff in my garden. I'll also point out one of the photos on the cover is my photo of a bee in my garden. That bee is Andrena milwaukeeensis. The Milwaukee mining bee or a miner bee. This shows you they have a species page for every single species in this report. It's massive. And it's really interesting. There's so much information that they've collected and condensed on one page. This shows both specimen records in collections like the Museum of Natural History or the State Archives or Cornell. This circle down here, there's a dot for iNaturalist records for this species in Brooklyn. Those are all my observations in my garden. So all the observations of this species in Brooklyn are by me from my garden as of when they issued the report some years ago. I'm sure there are more observations now. This is the photo. This is the bee. Again, just gorgeous. Such this beautiful, rich kind of cinnamon uh, fur or hairs. Here you can actually see her with the pollen from, this is a chokeberry, Aronia arbuifolia, blooming in May in my front yard. And again, plush toys, please. I really want a plushie of these bees. They're so beautiful. So then that brings me to the ground nesting bees project. And this project really partly came out of the Empire State Native Pollinator Survey, but it's really an independent project because there's very little known about ground nesting bees. Again, big bee is really big honeybee and sucks away a lot of the money and resources. So getting some concentrated focus on ground nesting bees because they're such important pollinators. Um, the different slant on this was really to actively connect, they said, amateur observers, nest site discoverers to experts in real time. And these nest sites is something very specific that makes it possible to do this. And we'll talk about that biology, that ground nesting bee biology in a moment. The result of that biology is one can return to nesting aggregations day after day to observe bees during their flight activity, and also year after year. That's really important because that populate those bees that I saw in 2008, that same population, although it's now 18 generations later, that the same population of bees persists to this day, and it's gotten bigger and bigger and bigger every year. Um, a note about one aspect of bee biology is most bees are solitary. Again, big bee has it in our mind that there's a hive. If there's a bee, there's a hive. There isn't. Honeybees make hives. Bumblebees will make colonies, and there's other degrees of sociality or eusociality is the technical term about how cooperative bees may be. Solitary bees, and 80% of New York's bee species are solitary. Um, these will, it's one female doing all the work. Very occasionally, with some species of ground nesting bees, um, will bees be more cooperative, but still they're largely solitary. Like two females might share a nest entrance. They might uh, do guard behavior or something like that. Um, but this combination of solitary and ground nesting is really interesting. Now, there's one technical term on here that we don't need to keep, but I'm going to give you the source of this. This is from the GNBee's Instagram account. Okay, so you can visit that directly. There's a note at the bottom here. In addition to social versus solitary, there's pollen specialization. So social bees are generally polylectic. An easier way of saying this is that they're generalists when it comes to flowers. Solitary bees are often oligolectic, meaning they are specialists and tend to have narrower preferences. Now, these groups of flowers can be very broad, like a lot of Andretidae are specialists on plants in the rose family because they tend to be blooming when the time that they emerge. So like that Milwaukee minor bee on Aronia. Aronia is in the rose family. So that's an example, but that still gives them a lot of options. Some species are very, very specific down to a single genus and sometimes even just one or two species. Another aspect of the biology is ground nesting. And this is way too small for anybody to read. But again, this came from their Instagram account. So I'm going to paste the link in there and you can look at your leisure. I was trying to find a more legible version of this on the GNBee website, and I couldn't find it. But the main thing is you have a single female that is digging out a nest. She's doing this all by herself. Often there'll be a pile of dirt. Sometimes those piles of dirt are architectural in nature and quite elaborate. My little bees are just picking the dirt out of the way. Just get out of the way. They're visiting flowers. Some of them may be specialists, collecting the pollen from that, And then in a little chamber that they created off the main tunnel, they're creating a pollen ball, a mix of nectar and pollen, just like all other, well, all the other actual non-parasitic bees do. I had no time to get into parasitic bee behavior. Um, and when that ball is enough, she'll lay a single egg on it and she'll close it off. She's lined the whole little cell with some kind of material. Different bees use different materials. Uh, the Coletidae, they exude a substance which they smear onto the surface in a very thin layer that dries and hardens and is resistant, water resistant and translucent, like cellophane, hence cellophane bees. So it makes it easy to remember what they're doing underground. And they'll do different chambers, many different chambers. There can be a number of different bees in a single nest entrance. If she's really successful, she may go and start another nest entrance, often very close by. Now, the technical term here is what they call natal philapatry, which means that when bees emerge, they will try to nest in the same area. So they're not coming out and then going, you know, even 100 yards away. So if a population is disrupted or destroyed, it may take a very long time before that population returns to that site. But it also means that the population, as long as the conditions remain favorable, the soil is accessible for them to dig. They've got the right pollen sources blooming at the right time that they're emerging. They can build their populations indefinitely and just build and build and build. I now have these bees from that original one site that I have. I now have them nesting on 3 sides of my house, which and one side of the house has a lot in one place. And I'm just astonished by this. They keep finding new places to nest. So I guess my garden is a good habitat for them. Um, this is that sign. Again, I don't expect you to read it, but what's interesting is this is a good graphic of kind of the architecture of a nest. That's a lot of pollen balls and nest entrances. That's not for uh, a cellophane bee. They have smaller uh, number of nests. There's a QR code that people can scan. This is in my front yard, as you saw. It gets a lot of attention. Its sign has been great for getting people's attention. They stop, they look, they're interested. It challenges their assumptions about what bee means. And if I'm around, I say, oh, let me know if you have any questions. And often, more often than not, there are questions. I loved showing people the bees when the bees were active. That was always fun because that's a rare opportunity to see them when they're buzzing around. Here is an example of that nesting activity. So the GNBee stuff said like you could really see a lot of activity in one place. This is a recording I made, a slow motion recording I made of one of the sites that I sampled for the ground nesting bee project. This is about 1/10, 1/12 speed, just so you get an idea of how fast these things are actually moving around. Almost every single one of these is a cellophane bee. My little bees in here. So this was an active nesting site, and you can see barely some mounds of dirt, some like, dirt that's not smooth, with the soil surface is not smooth, it's just kind of crumbly. That's the stuff they're kicking out when they're digging. And this goes on for a while. We don't need to see the whole thing, but just to give you an idea of at its peak, what that nesting activity looks like. It's really impressive. And it's really cool to see. I always get excited. Stop, stop. So there are iNaturalist projects. Okay. Um, this project, however, is global. It is not limited to New York State. So I think they expanded it at one point. Um, you'll see on here, there, Rufous-backed Cellophane bee is second in the number of observations, the most observed. 15% of those observations globally, really it's North America, are from my garden. So I have observed this for 18 years. I have a lot of observations of this species and a lot of cool behaviors. And that got the attention of the researchers. Okay. They recruited me in March of this year. They sent me a message on my Naturalist. As part of a collective effort, your observation of Coletes thrasticus has been identified as a significant research and conservation priority. I am very proud that my garden is a site of conservation priority. That is awesome. That is very rewarding. I was so excited and proud to get this year. This is the actual observation that they selected. They're tying observations to the participants. And so this is how they were able to see who's actually watching these bees and who's monitoring them and how long have they been watching and so on. So they knew I had been watching these bees for many, many years. There's actually a mating pair here. The one in the middle with the bright orange, that's a female. The guy on the right with the paler fur hairs is a male. And then on the left is another male trying to get in on the action. It's very competitive. So these are the things they asked each participant to do. And before I move on, are there any other participants in the project on the call? I'd be really love to hear from you two at the end of this. Okay, I guess not. My site is the only site in New York City and for maybe 100 miles around. There are sites all over the state. So they really went to a lot of different species, a lot of different kinds of sites. Mine was a really urban site, but these are the things they wanted us to do. Set up an emergence trap. The emergence trap covers the area and any area where I think bees are going to emerge. They all get collected into a tube. We'll take a look at that in a moment. And I collect them, put them in a baggie, freeze them, and then send them all off at the end of the season. I need to describe the site. They haven't been here. They don't know what it's like. I have lots of photos of all of this. Slow motion videos of nesting activity. We just saw one. Macro photography. That's my bag. That's what I do. Estimate the area that we're surveying. Count nests. This was something I had never done. And scale that up to estimate the total number. Never did that. I always thought maybe there's 50, maybe 100 nests at tops. You'll see I was way off. Collect females with pollen. This is not something I normally do. I do my photography. I don't do destructive sampling of insects if I can avoid it. But I knew that these are going to a good cause, that they're certainly being done ethically because there are so many of them. And by the end, I got really good at identifying females with pollen returning to their nest and being able to snag them with a net. It was really slow at first. And then finally sample the soil around the brood cells. They told me go to 12 inches for my population. I also monitored soil temperature. I won't talk about that, but that was kind of an extra. I was curious about that I figured it was some depth of soil and the temperature at that depth when they would start to emerge. Come on. There we go. Okay. Describe and measure the site. This actually is number one because I had to figure out where to put trap and where I was going to survey. So this is what that early shot of like barren wasteland on the side of the house by the driveway. This is what it looked like at the beginning of the year. The driveway is inadvertently a permeable driveway, but that's not what's important right now. So the area where they have been most active all these years is this whole area from the back of this porch over here to the back of the house. And that's 40 feet. The trap, I selected this spot as the trap, and we'll look at that in more detail. I selected these two areas to sample. And the depth of this, it varies because of the bay window and the driveway. So it averages about 7 feet deep from end to end. So 280 square feet of area for the site. This is what I had to work with. This is looking at that spot that I selected at the beginning, just with all the dead stems that I leave standing year after year for all the stem nesting bees. But I had to clear it. So this is what I cleared for the trap, and then this is what the trap looks like in position on that spot that I had cleared. This doesn't show you everything that's going on. That kind of knot and the zipper, you can just kind of make out below that red label. That's what's going on here. There's a collection tube, and then there's a jar, which I put alcohol in. And the bees fly up from the trap into that tube. There's kind of a little divider, so they get on one side and they can't figure out how to get back. They get disoriented, they drop down, and that kills them. It also preserves them until I can collect them. And looking down into the jar, this is kind of what it looks like. This is, you can look down and see what you've got. Each one of these big guys or gals is a bee, is one of my cellophane bees. You can see there's some maybe winged ants, and there's some super, super, super tiny things here. Those are thrips. And I actually have some observations of those. When I take them all out, I have to strain them. I chose to put them all out just to sort of get an idea of what I had. Again, you can see how many bees could be collected in a week. This is really active. And this is all from the same area. So they're emerging week after week. They're not all emerging at the same time. There's a skew in the population. Some will emerge early, some will emerge late, and that helps them with shifting phenology. But if there's not enough overlap, that can affect the population. Counting nest entrances. This is one of the sites that I chose. It was actually on the far left. You see there's like a broom sticking out there that's leaning against the side of the porch. So you know it's on that far end. It's right by the driveway. What they told you to do, see, most of these kind of nesting areas are big and they're relatively flat ground and they're typically sandy soils. My site is none of this. And so I had to kind of adapt for, well, they want you to get samples from the center and get like 5 samples out to the edge, every X number of feet. Not possible in my site. It's only 7 feet deep. But I figured I interpreted edge as by the driveway and by one end, and center as against the house, away from disturbance, and kind of in the middle. And that's what I did. So this is just one of the sites, the one that is the edge site. So you select the site, you mark it out. They provided this string, which is a standard quadrat. If you put it in a perfect square, it would be 1 meter by 1 meter. So a square meter. Mine were not square, and so I just measured what the area was, hence the tape measure. So I have what the area is for this site. Then I had to count nest entrances until there was no more nesting activity. In order to do that, I had to cut all these emergent plants down to the ground. I had to do that more than once. Everything is coming up. I didn't want to pull because that would disturb the nest entrances and I would lose some of the entrances. So it's like getting down there like bonsai, just clipping things off at a very, very fine level. This is what it looked like when I had clipped most of the things. And it was very easy to lose track because there were far more than I thought. So I started using little plant tags, plant markers, and stuck them in so I would not lose count. Okay, in that area, I finally counted 17. Capture females with pollen, I did that. I don't have any photos of that, unfortunately, but I would capture them. They went into a death tube, a little killing jar, and then they just collected them, and then they go into the freezer. And they'll be all set back too. Soil samples and brood cells. So it was hard for me to figure out where to go because everything had grown back. And so communicating with the researchers, they said, you know what, you could just survey the trap area because we know that they were there. What we're interested in is the soil. They want to know what are the soil conditions. So I did that. There wouldn't be any new brood cells to sample. I dug a hole 10 inches deep. And that was just how deep my largest garden spade was, and then dug out from the center of that. So I have a sample from 10 to 13 inches, which covers the 12 inches that they asked me to do, and I bagged that up. So here's my effort to do that. This uh, crossbar here is so that I could use this metal ruler to measure how deep the base hole, the square hole, actually was. This is a technique that you do when you're planting a tree or another woody plant to know you're not planting it too deep. And so I just adapted that gardening technique here. And then this was a soiled knife that has markings on it, so I knew I was going down another 3 inches. Okay, what did I find? 280 square feet, as I mentioned, 26 square meters. I netted 20 females. They wanted me to get a lot more, but I got a good bunch. From the emergence trap over the whole season, I collected 41 of the Colettes and a lot of other bycatch, all of which is going to Cornell, and I'm hoping they can identify some of them for me. I sampled 2 areas. There was a total of 56 nests between those 2 areas. So the one that was in the middle against the house had twice as many nests as the one that was by the edge. So there really was an edge effect that I saw in my garden. So getting 2 areas certainly was important. If I could have done more, I would have done more. So that's 6.8%. You scale that up. How many nests were in the whole area? 825, far more than the 50 that I had ever imagined. You can estimate how many bees that represents because studies have shown how many brood cells there are in a nest. I have somewhere between 7,500 and almost 10,000 bees in that section along my driveway. I am astounded by this number. I thought, yeah, there's a couple of hundred bees. Yeah, they're there. No, 10,000 bees. I can't imagine. And now they're on other sides of the house. So I have far more than these numbers that I'm supporting here. And I'm just really proud of that. So I've talked a lot about my experience. I won't delve into it more here. I want to leave time for questions and discussion. But if anybody has any specific questions, we can get into that. So how many different bee species can be found in New York City? You can unmute and shout it if you want, or just jam it into the chat. Oh, Adrian, you're a participant. That's great. That's great. I want to hear about that. Uh, yeah, 217. It was close. It's 217 bee species. Um, I just want to have acknowledgments of people who throughout my life have influenced me to bring me to where I am and uh, have made it possible for me to do what I'm doing now. If people whom I've omitted, I apologize. I really had to go back and research um, what everything was. Who did I first hear from on this? Who first identified the bees? All these kinds of things. So a lot of different people, including family and teachers in school. This is my contact information. I'm going to leave this up. I had not been looking for questions in the chat. I don't know, Chrissy, Christy, have you seen things?
Yes. I have seen things.
I've seen some things, yes.
I, no, I'm just looking for the first
Yeah,
actual question. So Betsy asked, what plants do you have that your little bees use? And do they use any water source in your yard?
okay. To answer the first question, I'm going to show you live. Um, this is how I can answer that question. I use iNaturalist. So this is all my observations of Colettes, different Colette species that I've observed. These are my little bees. So I can look at these and I can sort of at a glance see, are any of these visiting flowers in my garden? And surprisingly, I never see them visiting flowers in my garden. So I don't know what they're visiting. I want to know, but I never see them. Here's one. Oh my God, one on a sunflower, I think. 1 out of 60 observations. Let's take a look at this. Is that a sunflower or is it Pacora? I document this also. Pacora, it's Pacora because that was be blooming in the spring. Sunflowers don't bloom in the spring. I don't have Pacora in my garden right now. I want them, and this is one reason. Yes, I can. Let's see if I can copy my contact info. Hold on a second. Uh, oh, yeah, I have to go back to I can't copy it from this for some reason. I have to go to my slide sorter and grab it from there. Hold on a second. Okay. Yes, there's all my contact information, including my email. Okay. So that's just to show you that recording, observing these over the years and documenting this. I mean, you can see this was 10 years ago. So I don't see them visiting flowers in my garden. I would love to know. Oh, there's another Pacora. So I'm hoping, although this is not the focus of their research, I'm hoping that there's an opportunity for them to do some pollen analysis. However, they're more interested in this, for this project, in the microbiome. Like, what are the gut bacteria? Are there parasites that they're dealing with? All this kind of microflora and microfauna in the bees themselves. So they're kind of probably be blending a lot of these bees um, to get that. There's probably some dissection, some just infinitesimal dissection that they do too. So I don't know what flowers they're visiting. They know that they're not visiting much in my yard. And for water sources, most bees, unless it's very hot and dry, most bees can get sufficient water from the nectar. I do have a bird bath. Actually, I have 3 bird baths that I maintain, one in the front and 2 in the backyard with little pieces of mosquito dung in them. So if they need water, that's always accessible. What I see visiting those is not bees, but wasps or sometimes mason bees because they need to mix up a little mud, uh, or like mud dauber wasps and things like that. So wasps love the bird bath.
All right. Thank you, Chris. Adrian, do you want to tell us a little bit about what bees you've found?
Yeah, what's your experience here?
I just joined the ground nesting bee project this year. I wasn't aware of it prior to that.
Yeah,
I wish I had joined last year because I had about 7 nests in my yard, and that would have been great. This year,
okay,
I found 1, and I could not
okay,
get pictures of bees for identification to save my life.
okay.
But I
So
did get 1 offsite ground nesting bees, and
okay,
I submitted it, but I don't know how you find out what it was.
okay. So when you say you joined the project, you mean you joined the iNaturalist project?
No, the ground nesting bee project.
Okay. So did they have you do the kind of things that I did?
No, no.
Okay. Maybe because you didn't join early enough in the year. Because
Yeah,
notice
maybe.
they contacted me in March, like 2 months before there would be any activity. And they had to do that because they had to get all the traps into everybody's hands before any bees emerged.
Oh, okay.
So that was why they reached out. But now that they know about you, and if you have a site that you can revisit, that's the key, is you have to be able to visit it weekly. And you have to have permission of the landowner. I'm the landowner, so that was easy. But if it's another site, you could probably talk to the land manager or something. I'm sure they'd be very happy to participate and have a master naturalist surveying their site. The
Yeah,
way
most
you
of
could,
them were my yard, so that would be okay. You
but
know,
that's good. That's good. So
yeah,
I would use iNaturalist.
yeah, I
Uh,
use that like crazy.
yeah, get get photos, get them online. You can use the trick of netting and chilling the bees.
Yeah, I didn't know.
Uh, to slow them down so you have enough time to get pictures of them, right? It's really hard to photograph them unless they're visiting flowers. These bees do not visit flowers in my garden. I don't know why. I don't know what they want. It may be that they want asters, but Pachyra is the only aster, early blooming aster, and I don't have them on my garden anymore. I don't know what they're using. At that, maybe it's dandelions. I don't know.
I have Coreopsis tripteris, which they tend to really love.
Okay. When
So
does that bloom?
that blooms from mid-June and it's still going strong now.
Yes. See, that's too late.
Yeah.
These
you're
bees
right.
are done by the first week of June.
Yeah.
They can start as early as mid-April. So that was how I figured out. And from the observations in my garden, I know that that's what they do.
Well, they're
So
doing some kind of spring ephemeral. We just don't know which ones.
it may not be a forest ephemeral species. It just may be something else that's blooming early, before other things leaf out, like in a meadow. So like Pachyra, right? I don't think of that as a woodland species. I don't think of that as an ephemeral. Uh, but it's the earliest blooming aster family plant I know. And so it's interesting that those are the only photos I have, 2 out of 60, of observing this bee for 18 years in my garden.
Chris,
Oh,
do you have any,
sorry.
oh, sorry, Adrian. I was wondering, Chris, if you have any red maple around. There was a graduate student at Cornell a number of years ago, and she was finding a lot of Caletes nests, very,
Okay.
very early ones, in the proximity of red maples.
Yeah. One thing New York City has, especially in my neighborhood, is a lot of street trees, oaks and maples, a lot of them. And
So
so that's the thing, is most of the early blooming plants are woody plants in our area, and they're blooming even earlier than most of the spring ephemerals. But they're way up high and we don't see them. So kudos to those intrepid students who have gone up into trees and collected things. So a lot of pin oaks in my neighborhood. Um, there's some red maples. And then also, if you saw, you got an idea that my house is not a row house like you think of when you think of New York City. It's a standalone house. And that's what my neighborhood is all these standalone houses. So that means that there's side yards and there's backyards, and people have all kinds of ornamental plants that they planted in their garden. So there is a great diversity of things to choose from. So maybe the Colettes are narrowly oligolectic, or broadly oligolectic, like they like a few genera or families, but that could also be just what's blooming at the time that they're emerging. It's hard to know what the preferences are.
Yes.
There's a question about, are they only active in the early spring and summer? Not all of them are. Um, some, especially the mining bees, some of them will emerge later in the year. And this is one of the things that's interesting. There are a lot in spring. That seems to be the bulk of them because they're taking advantage of some of these early blooming plants. And so there's a lot of specialization there because they have to time their emergence with the flowering of their pollen hosts. Things that emerge later in the year may not be so. Thank you, Jennifer. This will be recorded, obviously, so you can always look back at it. Um, there's a lot more blooming, especially asters, later in the year, and so some of the other bees may not be such specialists if they're emerging later in the year. I know that there are Andrenidae, uh, the true, quote, mining bees, that different species emerge at different times of the year. There are some species that can have more than one brood in a year, like the early brood will actually hatch out and have another brood, and there'll be like a lull in activity between those two.
Chris, there was another question from Colette. She wondered if the oak trees are being visited by the Coletes, and says the
Uh,
bees love her sandy yard, which is surrounded by oak species.
well, like as I mentioned, they've got plenty of oaks. There's lots of pin oaks planted as street trees in my area. It's not commonly planted as a garden tree because they get so huge. But there's a lot of Japanese maples planted. I don't know if they're any good. Um, so I don't know. Um, per what Christy just, reported, there is research that supports the idea that they're visiting at least some trees. And so
Yeah,
yeah,
I was just going to add that there's a former grad student. She's working for the Xerces Society now, but she did a lot of work with, I think, Brian Danforth and Scott McCart at Cornell,
oh,
and
I think I
um,
know her. What's her name?
Cass Urban Mead.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
know her.
So Cass is amazing, but she did a lot of research. They were looking at bees that visit agricultural areas, I think
Yeah,
specifically orchards. She
yeah,
collected the pollen from a lot of these bees and then typed the pollen, like, you know, extracted the pollen, typed the pollen, took pictures of all the pollen of different
yeah,
trees, and found that the bees, wild bees in agricultural areas were using the like adjacent woodlands very often,
yeah,
and found things like, maple pollen and oak pollen, which oaks are wind pollinated. They don't need to be
yeah,
visited by insects, but that these, forest trees were very important. And so having some natural habitat near your agricultural areas can actually, boost your the amount of pollinators that visit
yeah.
your crop and the amount of production that you get. So,
I remember when she was doing that research and doing webinars and talks about it. It was very exciting to hear. And it's just another example of why we need to maintain landscape scale diversity in agricultural areas in order to maximize uh, pollination and crop yields, especially for fruits.
mhm.